Bonjour, Wacheyanin. Welcome to Lakehead University's United Nations Decade of Indigenous Languages kickoff event, the Warriors Manifesto with Dr. Anton Treuer. Lakehead is committed to mobilizing relevant stakeholders for the preservation, revitalization, and promotion of Indigenous languages. The decade also focuses on mainstreaming, taking pride in linguistic diversity and multilingualism while ensuring the rights of Indigenous peoples to preserve and promote their languages are respected. We are happy that you are able to join us today. Denise Baxter, Makwadodum, Martin Falls, Nindonjiba. My name is Denise Baxter, Vice Provost, Indigenous Initiatives at Lakehead University, and I will be your MC for the event. Lakehead University respectfully acknowledges its campuses are located on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. Lakehead Thunder Bay is located on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Spirit Treaty of 1850. Lakehead Aurelia is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. And Lakehead University acknowledges the history that many nations hold in and around their campuses, and it's committed to relationships with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. In Lakehead's commitment to social justice and social responsibility, we advance the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and the University of Canada Principles on Indigenous Education. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendation to build capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect has become a guiding principle for the commitments Lakehead has made in both Northwestern Ontario and Simcoe County, and will continue to guide our efforts in the future. It's now my pleasure to invite Elder Jean Nawagijik from Kiashkis Aging Anishinaabe, Gull Bay First Nation, to share an opening prayer. Welcome, Elder Jean.
Morning. Bonjour. Ani, moche. It's an honor again for me to do an opening prayer, and I heard you guys this morning talk about snow. I have to quote Chief Dan George says, "Don't talk about snow." And my friend there, Chief Collins, nice to see you on screen again. And always active and now supportive in Indigenous affairs. I'm just going to do a short prayer, acknowledging today and the sacred directions, and I'll do it in Ojibwe language. Show us Makons Najnakas. Say ma Pogan git monak nanak dob mission. Nanak dobum the magnak nichke. Show us wabanang shawnang nagabi nang kiret nang where mama the kim. And Ni Ajni Boya show us. Dobum the magnak monongum kekagi doat. We need the totamang where kanak magziang where Nishinaabe win. Shomes Anish Nibaris Nibadsman Nishin Senamang where Kigo Ito Kaziang where not the Mongo Nishinaabe Nanik Mashomes Anish where King Kinigilon and Agdom the one Kinigilon Kenaman Mido. Miigwech. Thank you, everyone. Have a good session.
Good, Elder Jean. Always a pleasure to see you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Chief Peter Collins of Fort William First Nation. Chief Peter Collins is currently serving his 10th term of the Chief of Fort William First Nation. He has previously served 9 years as Regional Grand Chief of the North Superior Region and currently holds a board position with the Union of Ontario Indians, Anishinaabe Nation. Chief Collins sits on the board of directors for Delico and is the president of the BPL, Bakash Marwa, the East-West Tie Line Project. Chief Collins holds a committee membership position with the Boer Alaskan Faculty of Law Advisory Committee. In 2016, he was appointed to the Chiefs Committee on Economic Development with the Assembly of First Nations. Chief Collins is a leader who works hard for his community and is focused on advancing Fort William First Nation through economic development and capacity building. With his dynamic vision, he wants to ensure that Fort William First Nation will position itself to be a leader in the area and be a partner to other surrounding communities, businesses, and organizations. And we are privileged to call Chief Collins and Fort William First Nation a partner to Lakehead University. Welcome, Chief Collins.
Good morning, Denise, and thank you. And good morning to everyone that has joined this morning for a very important topic. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the university for all their work and dedication to revitalizing the importance of our language, to revitalizing the importance of our treaty and connecting and building that partnership together with each other. Also, I'd be remiss if I don't acknowledge our elder in our opening prayer and in his teaching and starting us off in a nice way. So, Dr. Anton, I'm going to give you a little story. I know you got many stories, but we're an urban community. We've been living on, or the city's been living on the edge of our territory for generations now. And we had a chief in our community that wrote a paper in 1967, and he was our longest serving chief in our community. And he predicted by the 1990s that the language and a lot of our culture and a lot of our teachings will all be lost. And he nailed it pretty close to being right. But our community is starting to rehabilitate our languages and trying to rehabilitate our cultures and our beliefs. But it takes a decade of learning and a lot of work to do that. You know, growing up, we went into the city mainstream schools. Even though my grandparents on my dad's side were fluent, spoke our language fluent, we didn't get enough time to spend with them, to listen, to understand, to pick up that language, because we, again, being school in urban settings, the language was not part of that education system. So there's so much work. I know you have a good message, a strong message to bring, but you know, Elder Gordon, who's now gone out to the spirit world, reminded us as leaders, it's up to us to make sure that our language is rebuilt in our communities. It's an integral part of who we are as a nation, who we are as a community, and who we are as First Nation people in this country. So again, I apologize. I do have to run. I have another meeting. I've got so many things going on right now. And as Denise said, it's been a long, long ride for me as the chief in the community of Fort William. And I enjoyed every minute of it. There's so much work to be done on so many different aspects, and language is a part of that. And I know our younger generations are starting to pick up that language day in and day out, a little at a time. But it's so tough that if you're not all speaking it, it's hard to learn. It's hard to educate each other. So hopefully, as generations grow and learn to pick up the language, they start building that language with each other and regain that native tongue that we rightfully belongs in our community. So on behalf of Fort William First Nation, the 2,500 members I represent, our council, I thank you. I wish you all the best today. Have a beautiful day. Dr. McPherson, as always, it's a pleasure to see you. So enjoy your meeting today, and wish I could stay, but I do have a meeting with Minister Hadu at 9:50. And so again, I apologize. So have a great day.
Miigwech, Chief Collins, and good luck with your meeting. And thank you so much for joining us. It is now my pleasure to introduce Head Councillor Lorraine McRae, Nigan Inabid, one who looks ahead. Lorraine is an inspirational teacher, curriculum developer, songwriter, visionary, and peacemaker from Chippewa of Rama First Nation, where she was elected the first woman chief between 1994 and the year 2000. Presently, Lorraine is serving her community through a 4-year term from 2020 to 2024 as the head counselor. Lorraine has a 30-year career in social work and continues to advocate for healthy communities. As a founding member of the restorative justice program called Bidabin, Majiganing community healing model, Lorraine continues to provide training to revitalize and enhance this model as her First Nation works towards healing, truth, and reconciliation. Lorraine was lovingly raised as a child by her maternal grandparents. She is a proud mother of 3 children and grandmother of 8 grandchildren and auntie to many. Her joys are lifelong learning, the love of family, community, nation, and all of creation. The source of Lorraine's identity and inner strength is drawn from her understanding of the Anishinaabe language and the Anishinaabe way of life that was role modeled during her upbringing by her grandparents and great-grandparents. This knowledge provides insight and guidance to understanding creation and everyday life through a cultural worldview. Lorraine is a supporter of nation building and the reawakening of community to the importance of respectful relationships with Mother Earth and all nations around the world. She is grateful and thankful for her ancestors' holistic worldview of spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and physical well-being, which is the foundation of cultural identity and way of life. As a member of a larger human family, Lorraine believes that we have the wisdom, principle, and fortitude to create a world of healing, peace, and justice. Welcome, Head Counselor Lorraine McRae.
Anin Fujo Kinawaya. Nigon and Albin down, Chickeny Qua, she can't do them. Nick Chenandam go Kinawabman go Nongum. It's my honor today to welcome each and every one of you on behalf of Chief Ted Williams and our council to our traditional territory of the Chippewas of Rama First Nation, and we're a signatory to the Williams Treaties First Nation. I want to say Chimigwach to Jean Nawagajic, our elder today, for that beautiful opening. I'm always so happy to hear that language. We don't always get to hear it very often in our communities these days. And thank you for the beautiful welcome from Denise Baxter and Chief Peter Collins. I want to today acknowledge our honorable ancestors and all of those wise elders and all of our traditional teachers. I'm so very grateful for their strength and their resilience and their courage to respect and care for our lands for all these many generations, taking care of our water and all of creation, and doing our best to do that and continuing on doing that still today. I acknowledge all of our language warriors who work so hard and with so much love and passion. And, you know, they do their very best. I know in our community, we have been doing our best for so many years. And I know there's times when we think we can't keep going, you know, but we never give up. And that's where we are today as well. You know, our elders remind us that the spirit of our people is in the language. Gagat go aoyang, mi ma wenjabamagak and wayang. Who we truly are as Anishinaabe comes through that sound and the wisdom of our language. Our children are always first and foremost on our minds, and we think of all those little children that are being uncovered today. And you know, what we can give to our children today is to pass on all of those things that was taken from us. We must begin speaking our language today and passing that on to our future generations. We at the Chippewas of Rama First Nation have been working on language programs, you know, for many years now. And we're presently working in a more intentional way these days with language reclamation and preservation throughout our community and in our workplace. It's our hope that, you know, soon we'll be in a position to open an immersion daycare center for children ages 2 to 6. It's one of our dreams here, and we keep pushing that forward and hoping that our community will join us and will want that for our children and our future. So we are beginning to use the language in our official chief and council meetings now, which feels so good to me, and with our staff and community throughout our many departmental services. Our communities, I think, are more ready now than in the past to take on the responsibility of maintaining and revitalizing our languages. You know, we really need to protect that valuable knowledge and that worldview and that way of life of our ancestors. It's so important for our world to do that because we're needed to do that. I'm truly grateful today to welcome you, Dr. Anton Treuer. Your teachings have given me personally so much inspiration and validation for the language and culture that was taught to me by the old ones. And I know that we're also very deeply grateful for your many years of work and valuable contributions, and for the love and passion that you have for family and language and culture reclamation. I've truly personally enjoyed reading 2 of your books now, The Cultural Toolbox and The Language Warriors Manifesto. It's meant a lot to me to read those books and to know what you're doing out there in the world and for so many years as well. I want to thank you, Lakehead University, for your kind invitation today to be here with you. And once again, welcome to each and every one of you. Chimigwach Gibazindwayag. Thank you for listening. I'll meet you. Chimigwach.
So amazing. So I really appreciate you coming and joining and sharing the work that you're doing with your community, Head Counselor McCrae. It is now my pleasure to introduce Lakehead University's President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Maura McPherson. Welcome, Dr. McPherson.
Thank you, Denise, and good morning, Bonjour, and Chimagwich, Elder Jean, for your prayer and your beautiful opening this morning. Thank you also to Chief Collins. I know he's had to leave for a meeting, and thank you also to Councillor McCrae for your welcoming words and for participating and supporting this important event for the university. And of course, welcome to all of our guests today to Lakehead University's United Nations Decade of Indigenous Languages launch event. We are really honored to have as our special guest today, Dr. Anton Treuer, a leader in Ojibwe language and cultural revitalization. Lakehead University's campuses are situated on Anishinaabe lands and territories, and our relationship with Indigenous nations is of the utmost importance to the vision and mission of our university. It's reflected in every aspect of our plans, our strategic plan, our academic plan, and our research plan. We recognize the special importance of Indigenous languages to their communities and how language itself holds unique worldviews, ways of knowing and being, and ancient wisdom that has been passed down through countless generations. In February 2020, at the Making a Decade of Action for Indigenous Languages meeting in Mexico City, the Los Pinos Declaration was passed by over 500 participants from over 50 countries. The declaration reaffirmed the right of Indigenous peoples to freedom of expression and education in their mother tongue, and to participate in public life using their languages. The declaration highlights that over 7,000 Indigenous languages exist on our planet. And it also teaches us that the vast majority of these are threatened to extinction by the end of this century. Indigenous language revitalization is not a responsibility that First Nations communities must face alone. It represents a call to action across every part of Canadian society. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada released the final report on the Indian residential school system and released 94 calls to action. Call to action number 16 specifically calls upon post-secondary institutions to develop Indigenous language and cultural programs. At Lakehead, we've committed to Indigenous language revitalization through the development of the Native Language Teachers Certificate Program, which started in 1973 and is now called the Indigenous Language Teachers Program. There are 3 different Indigenous languages spoken in and around Lakehead's campuses: Cree, Ojibwe, and 4 dialects of Ojibwe-Moan. While we have one of the longest running Indigenous language programs in Canada, we are looking forward to building and expanding on this program through our Decade of Indigenous Language Plan. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that later in the program. We're excited to respond to the Los Pinos Declaration on the Decade of Indigenous Languages and look at this as a vital opportunity to continue building collaborative relationships with Indigenous peoples. We hope that our commitment to Indigenous language revitalization and our deep appreciation of Indigenous knowledge will result in creating, supporting, and maintaining linguistic and cultural justice for the generations of today and those yet to come. So I conclude by saying, welcome, Dr. Treuer. Thank you for coming today to be part of this important launch. Thank you to all of the guests that are supporting the event, and Chimigwich, thank you. And I'm really looking forward to the presentation.
Request Dr. McPherson. It is now my pleasure to introduce Principal Dean Jobin Bevins, who is representing the Orillia campus. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you very much, Denise. Ani, Dean Jobin Bevins, is Nikos. I'm sincerely looking forward to today's presentation from Dr. Treuer and the space that this talk will undoubtedly open, allowing for listening, learning, and engagement specific to the role at Lakehead University and the ways that we can work to support Indigenous language recovery. The vitality of language is central to the preservation of culture. Language informs not only the way that we communicate, but it shapes the way in which we formulate our ideas, as well as our views of the world in which we live. The impacts of residential schools and the forcible loss of language is in fact one of the most tragic outcomes of this system, and it is most certainly felt by our Indigenous communities today. It is my hope that the learnings of this morning will signal an even greater commitment from Lakehead to continue to support the advancement, preservation, revitalization, and promotion of Indigenous languages within our communities, and of course, throughout our regions. Many sincere thanks once again for the opportunity to gain learning and understanding. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Dr. Jobin Bevins, always a pleasure to have you join us. I just want to preface, we have Dr. Paul Cormier, who is the chair of the Aboriginal Language and the associate professor at Lakehead University. He also is responsible for the Indigenous Languages Education Program and the Indigenous languages that are taught at Lakehead University. And at this point, we have formal classes. We also have informal classes where we have people. We had a group this winter who came in, and we had a guest speaker from out west who was working with students to gain the Michif language back into their everyday language. So that was a really great opportunity to share with students. We've had Vicki Monet work with speakers from her region as well in Orillia, and she has been hosting sessions for students to engage in Anishinaabe-Moan in that region. So we have formal and we have informal ways of making sure that we have language revitalization and experiences for students happening on our campuses. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Paul Cormier, who is the chair of Aboriginal Education at Lakehead. Welcome, Dr. Cormier.
Thanks, Denise. Bonjour, everybody. Maingin Indigenous, Maingin Ndodum. Good morning, everybody. My name is Paul Cormier. I'm chair of Aboriginal Education at Lakehead University. I'm a member of Lake Helen First Nations, a Red Rock Indian band, which is about an hour east of Thunder Bay. Just a few things this morning. My primary role here is to bring greetings from the Faculty of Education and our Dean, Wayne Melville. And just to say how excited I am for the launch of this, the Decade of Indigenous Languages. I think it's very important that we recognize the people that have led this and kind of initiated it. And Vicky Minogue has been absolutely instrumental in everything that has to do with this event. So she's done an incredible job for the university. And I think her passion for languages is infectious, and it's kind of coming through the university. So a really big chimigwech to Vicky for all her hard work. As President McPherson said, Lakehead University has a long history of working on and with Indigenous peoples on languages for many years. We're in the process of responding to community needs. I get many requests for different kinds of language initiatives, teacher initiatives, and we're actively trying to engage and revitalize our own programs while communities are also revitalizing their programs. So this is a very exciting time for us, and we really hope that this will generate momentum and will continue towards working with communities in languages, language revitalization, and training of teachers to become language teachers. So I'll leave it at that. It's just really exciting to have Dr. Anton Treuer here, and then I really look forward to what he has to say. Miigwech, and welcome everybody.
Miigwech, Dr. Cormier. Now I have to echo Dr. Cormier's words of praise, I will call it, but also deep appreciation. I had a chance to first meet Vicky when I started here at Lakehead, I think back in around 2017, 2018, when she was an undergraduate student at that time. But she was always, very committed to moving languages forward within Lakehead University's footprint for our students, and certainly within the communities that we serve. And so when we started this work, and Vicky had reached out to us to say, we should really do something large, not just something small. And she said, I know somebody. And she mentioned Dr. Anton Treuer, who she had the opportunity to work with on several occasions, as she is really I don't want to say, I think you're a strong advocate, Vicky. She is, I would say, very fluent in the language, often speaks about her mother and the work that she does with her mother, who is a first language speaker in Anishinaabe-Moan. And so we had the opportunity to have Vicky reach out to Dr. Treuer to inquire if he might be interested in joining us today. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Anton Treuer. Dr. Treuer is a professor of Ojibwe at the Bemidji State University and author of 19 books. He has a BA from Princeton University and an MA and PhD from the University of Minnesota. He is editor of the Oskabewis Native Journal, the only academic journal in the Ojibwe language. Dr. Treuer has presented all over the US and Canada and in several foreign countries on everything you wanted to know about Indians but were afraid to ask: cultural competence and equity, strategies for addressing the achievement, quote unquote, gap, and tribal sovereignty, history, language, and culture. He has sat on many organizational boards and has received more than 40 prestigious awards and fellowships, including ones from the American Philosophical Society, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, and the MacArthur Foundation, the Bush Foundation, and the John Simpson Guggenheim Foundation. Sorry, that would be John Simon Guggenheim Foundation. His published works include Everything You Want Is to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask, The Language Warriors Manifesto, How to Keep Our Languages Alive No Matter the Odds, which he'll be speaking about today, Warrior Nation, A History of the Red Lake Ojibwe, winner of the Carolyn Bancroft History Award of Merit, Ojibwe in Minnesota, Minnesota's Best Read 2010, by the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress, The Assassination of the Hole in the Day, which won an Award of Merit, winner from the American Association for State and Local History, the Atlas of Indian Nations, the Indian Wars, Battles, Bloodshed, and the Fight for Freedom on the American Frontier, and Assiniboisig, Minnesota's Best Read for 2011 by the Center for the Book in the Library of Congress. Dr. Treuer is on the governing board for Minnesota State's Historical Society. In 2018, he was named a Guardian of Culture and Lifeways and the recipient of the Pathfinder Award by the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. He has accomplished a lot of academic work throughout his life, and the very important work certainly of working with communities and with people as we work collectively as nations to regain and revitalize our languages. So welcome, Dr. Anton Treuer.
Chimigwech, Nimigwechu Wendan, Nimigwechu Etagos Apaji, and Enimigwan. Bajayan, we weni de ganona diang, we weni sana de ganodamung, get in way when an epitain damung. Minawajina naga de wendamung, the waj gejich nigan, we weni sana de meno bima de zi winagak. We weni go gate the Gashkatuad, get up inuji minanig, we weni sana de meno get ken and dizawad, awiwad, anishina baby wad, as you bimi we do a gay winawa, yo all getting way when an on. Koi dash de wind munagug ajana awian wagosh indigu minawa migizi and dodem wasa indonjiba ode gazaga squaji mekag homa chimokomani wa king gawin dashing a kendazine wangi windeg chimokomani wa king gawin awia chimokomano de bendazine anishanabe wa ki migo nasab hiwide jaganashi wa king gawin awia jaganasho de bendazine anishanabe wa ki we weni sanaji nanaga de wendamang wenji windeg we weni keda anje tumen den shinabe in endamang kinegego yo es chigeang ni we migwechi we are all Jean nawigijik najiga gigadod we weni sanada de gononad no money dun Lorraine McCrae we weni sanaji niganed anyway kividud yo kedano kiwin anan minawa ongoge kenda sujig nibwa hikaki gadowa jeba. In Kajaganashim bangi, nayenjago ni we aba jitun, gishbin we anishana bewi ang natum gadaba jitumin getting wewin and on natum. I'll use some English today too, realizing we're in mixed company. Yeah, when they asked me to say a few words today about our language, they didn't say anything at all about doing it in a foreign language like English. But I'm really excited and heartened to be in your company and in community with you. Lakehead was an early leader in some of our Indigenous language revitalization efforts, especially at the collegiate level, and greatly admired all around the world for those early efforts and for the hard work it is to sustain those efforts. So I'm heartened to see all of you leaning in, even for those for whom Ojibwe might not be your first language, to see you picking up and using what you can. Keep leaning in, it's appreciated, and it's good to see and hear. I'm just really excited to be here, and I'm gonna jump right in. I do have a little PowerPoint I'll be sharing with you. We'll make sure we leave some time for questions. There's no way to exhaust an important conversation like this one, even in the time that we have. I dropped into the chat a link to my website, and there are more resources there, including lists of resources for Ojibwe language. There's some really exciting stuff going on now. We have been, over the past 20 years, launching new Ojibwe immersion schools, programs, publications. Just a month ago, we released year 1 of Rosetta Stone for Ojibwe. There's lots of new and exciting stuff. So I'll share some of that with you during our time, and there's more linked up on the website there too. All right, so if someone wants to enable me for a screen share, then I will pull up this PowerPoint real quick. All right. I'll put it in a slideshow. Koe de Gnodamang Gidin Wewin Anan, our language. It's really interesting, in the center of this word, Inwe means to speak a certain language, and Gidin Wewin Anan means our language. But all creatures on planet Earth, Inwe, they have their own characteristic way of sounding. So if you think about it, Anin Ainwade Animush. What is the characteristic sound of a dog? Ruff, ruff. Anin Ainwade Gajagace. Meow. Anin Ainwade Anishinaabe. Is it this, what I'm doing right now? Gema yo o ejigijwayan abajituyan indinwe win. And ultimately, I think a lot of the speakers who were sharing at the start of our talk today did a good job of speaking to the ways in which our language embodies our unique worldview, but it's also so central to our identity and to our unique way of looking at the world and solving problems. In many ways, every single one of us, from every racial group, every language community, we have all been deeply impacted by colonization. And colonization really is taking one language, culture, religion, and using it to supplant the others. It's about erasure. And so often colonization has used violence as a tool to effect erasure. But of course, when you solve your problems with violence, you make a bunch of other problems. Now, here we are with all kinds of problems, and they extend well beyond the language universe to climate change, politics, race relations, all kinds of things. Why would we think all of the problems created by the colonial way of solving problems could be solved by the colonial way of solving problems? They can't. And embedded in indigenous languages and thought and ways of knowing are more than vestigial remnants of some very different ways to look at the world and to solve problems. So we have something to share with the whole world. And we should be pollinating the garden that everyone's trying to harvest from, in addition to having a right to exist how we want to be, to manifest our own sovereignty and identity as we best see fit, and to be fully humanized, that this is something that is not just an act of charity for Indigenous people who have suffered victimization. It is something that will help us all be liberated from the oppressions that have plagued humans for thousands of years. In one of my recent books, I was grappling with some of these cultural concepts, as language and culture are so deeply connected to one another. And I think a lot of Indigenous people have received either the direct or passively delivered message that we are less than if, we didn't get to grow up with our language handed to us on a silver platter or something like that. But I'll share a little more about how languages and cultures change over time today too. But we are right where we should be, having been through all of the things that we have been through. When you look at residential boarding schools and things like that, it's kind of amazing not what we've lost, but what we still have. That an institution like Lakehead can identify 4 distinct dialects of Ojibwe that they serve, as well as Cree and OG Cree, and that we actually have humans who know these things and a chance to have meaningful interventions to help them live. That's pretty amazing. And for each of us as individuals, it's important to see our own humanity and that we are not somehow less than from having been through this history. You are a complete, fully realized human being. You are a soul who has a body. You are the one your ancestors were praying for and waiting for through the generations. You have been given a unique set of gifts, and you yourself are a gift to the world. I thought I'd get started by just sharing a little story. I consider myself to be an extremely unlikely candidate to know much of anything at all about our language and culture, and for a variety of reasons. But in this picture here is one of my elders, Betsy Schultz. She passed away, it's been a while now, 2002. And I was especially good friends with her dad, Archie Mosai, and I'll show you some pictures of him in a few minutes. Archie was a pretty remarkable guy. He was born in 1901. He died in 1996 all of his kids were even born in wigwams. He was 12 years old the first time he ever saw a white man. And he was in his 30s the first time he saw a car or a black man. When I met him, he was in a modern house watching WWF SmackDown on a TV, laughing really loud. And I always marveled at how much change he saw during his lifetime. I'll share a little more about my language journey in just a minute, but I ended up spending a lot of years kind of living on his couch and driving him around and being kind of his gopher, go for this, go for that, and things like that. And all I ever wanted to do really was be in the room with him. But it was kind of like Forrest Gump once he figured out how to run. After that, every time he went somewhere, he was running, and he never thought it would take him anywhere, but it sure did. And I kind of felt like that with our language and culture. But something was very different. In 1997, I was in a car on my way to a drum ceremony, and it was 1 year after Archie had passed away. And even though when he was in his 90s, he was such a great kind of spiritual presence. People asked him to do most of the speaking at ceremonies, even a lot of singing, even though he was quite advanced in years. And I always kind of marveled at his ability to do all of that, just the physical stamina for it. But I was driving over to ceremony because it was a year after he had passed, and they have a custom in that community where they have a bundle of gifts that they break, and it's part of a ceremony for bringing the family out of mourning. And on the way over there, I was thinking, wonder who is going to be speaking today. Like, I couldn't imagine somebody else who would be speaking over a bundle in that community. It was always Archie, but of course he had passed away. And I came in there, and Betsy was there, his daughter, and she'd always been so sweet to me because she would kiss me on both cheeks when we met each other and hug me close. And she really just loved the way I looked after her dad and stuff like that. And she did have these kind of like dark glasses, and she could give the, so-called mean Indian look, especially to her grandkids when she wanted to whip them into shape. But for the first time in my life, she was looking at me like I was one of her grandkids. And she came over, she had a wheelchair, so someone wheels her over. And she said, I bet you're wondering who's going to be talking today. I said, yeah, who is it? And she said, well, that's going to be you. And she had a pouch of tobacco in her hand and handed it to me. You've been following my dad around all these years. I'm gonna hear what you know. And she had a line of people behind her there. And the custom there is if people wanted to make a prayer, they'd make a bowl of food and they'd bring it to the drum. And so you'd sometimes have multiple bowls of food laid out next to the drum. And so they all started giving me their tobacco, and I had pouches tucked between each finger on both of my hands. And in my fists, there are 13 pouches of tobacco. And she said, my dad never forgot a native name, and he never forgot what someone was asking for. I'll be listening. And she just kind of sat back to watch. So of course I was terrified little kid, and really a very young man. And I got up, I pulled off the invocation, I talked for the bowls. I dared one glance at her, and she just kind of gave me one affirmative nod, and then shook her cane at her grandkids to go eat out of the bowls. And after that, it had kind of uncorked an unexpected line of work for me. I was just excited to be in the room learning about our ways, but I didn't really see myself as somebody who would be carrying them in any regard. But I was, of course, naive about all of those things. I mentioned that I considered myself an unlikely candidate to know about any of these things, and there are a number of reasons. One is my father's not even native. These are some pictures of him through the years. He was an Austrian Jewish immigrant and a Holocaust survivor. He spoke nothing but German the first 13 years of his life. He has an amazing story of his own. Got out at age 13, several months after the Anschluss, the German annexation of Austria. He and both of his parents and two cousins got out of there. Everyone else was killed in the Nazi Holocaust, over 300 immediate family members. Eventually, he made his way to Minnesota, met my mom, and here I am. And as a result, you know, my parents, although my mother came from a native community where there was a pretty vibrant use of the language, my father spoke German and English and did not speak Ojibwe. So that was one thing that was a contributing factor. Also, just looking at my own family, I have to go back to, you know, my great-grandmother, Isabel Matthews, who was really the last generation in our family where all of the kids were bossed around in the language and played with each other, speaking only Ojibwe and things like that. She's my Kubi in Danakobijigan. By the way, this is a really interesting piece to, you look at the meaning behind words. And so of course we have words for, you know, me, for my kids, for my, you know, parents, grandkids, grandparents, but the word for my great-grandchild and great-grandparent, it's the same word in Danakobijigan. And what it means literally is my line. And so when you look at myself, you know, my children and parents, grandchildren, grandparents, one generation out on either side, that's a span of 7 generations. And so what I believe is that 7 generations ago, somebody was thinking of us today, and they were making prayers and they were making decisions during really tough times to give us the best chance that we could have at a long, healthy, happy life. And in spite of the setbacks and traumas and dramas, what a gift they have given. And I believe also that we should be making decisions today thinking 7 generations ahead. Now, 7 generations from now, nobody's going to remember our names. But there's a chance that they will know our language, our culture, and our ways. If we make decisions that are going to equip them for their best chance at a long, healthy, happy life. By the way, if we made our decisions thinking in terms of 7 generations, we would not have most of these climate change issues and other problems that come when people make short-term decisions. What will improve shareholder profit over the next 5 years, as opposed to what will equip people 7 generations from now for their best chance at a long, healthy, happy life. So my Kubi was in an immersive Ojibwe environment. My grandmother, Luella Seeley, who just passed away fairly recently, just several months ago at the age of 98. She had a pretty good run. But no komis, she was taken from her family at a very young age, 6 years old, sent to residential boarding schools. Here in the United States, the residential boarding school system started a little bit earlier than it did in Canada, but it started to, you know, they started the shift to day schools also a little bit earlier here than they did in Canada. So I think in a place like Canada, you know, much of the grandparent generation, and actually a fair number of the parent generation, have had an experience with the residential boarding schools. Here in the United States, it's mainly the grandparent generation and older that had the experience with residential boarding schools. But there are a lot of parallels between the systems in terms of dislocating people from family, community, harsh physical punishment, not a lot of nurture. The schools here kept cemeteries for kids and things like that too. So for my grandmother, although she had her language going to school, coming out of school, you know, she had her own personal experience with trauma and the belief that it might be a way to protect my mom if she did not share everything she knew about the language. And so we had a break in the intergenerational transmission of the language in our family. Now, my mother has a very fascinating story of her own. So she grew up in a little village of Bennett, population 400 in the middle of the Leech Lake Reservation. And some parts of our culture were very common and deeply practiced in her family. So they made maple syrup every year. They hunted all the time. They went fishing all the time. They pulled the kids from school for wild rice season because all the kids had to help produce food for the family. So they had pretty visceral experience of poverty, but also kind of a rich experience around some parts of our culture. But culture is more than just, hunting, fishing, and gathering. It's also things like language, religion, and so forth. And that stuff was under pressure and not shared as deeply as it had been just one generation before in our family. And so I'll just mention a couple other things about her experience. When she went to school, she only met one professional Native person ever. And that person was the school nurse. And she thought, well, maybe I can do that. So she went on and she got a nursing degree. One of her first jobs came back working for the tribe for our health program. And she thought, wow, Indigenous people are getting pushed around. This is horrible. I'm going to do something about that. She went on and got a law degree. She was actually the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And I grew up watching my mom with her powwow braids, Indian Health Service Coke bottle, eyeglasses, and a suit, being the only woman in court, being the only Native in court, and fighting with effect. And I think that impressed upon me a few things. One is Natives can do stuff. Also, women can do stuff. Also, the importance of an education, and it's undeniable. Those kind of levers don't guarantee you a certain outcome, but it improves your chances of having more control over the kind of outcomes that you get. So you can finish college and still work at Starbucks, but you can finish college and take that degree and do some really amazing things with it. That said, education should not be a thorough whitewashing. It should be an opportunity to learn about ourselves as well as the rest of the world. And that is a transition that is just emerging in places like Canada and the United States, but we have a lot more work to do to truly indigenize education instead of just acculturate and assimilate Indigenous people into how to do whiteness really well. And there's a difference. So there were a number of things I saw in my mom's experience, but here too, you could see when my mom and dad got together, they ran the house in English. My mother was on a life journey of her own in a cultural sense. As I was raised, none of myself or my siblings were baptized or things like that. She held us around to ceremonies and we kind of followed that route. And I had a lot of exposure to the language, but at the same time, by the time I was coming out of high school, I was a good English speaker and I had scattered non-fluent Ojibwe language skills. It's a picture of me as a little tyke. My parents too were on a journey on many levels. So they started out, my father was hitting the restart button in his life. My mother was trying to find a pathway out of poverty. For quite a while, we had a little house that had a kerosene lantern, no electricity, no running water. And, that was me washing up in the creek in the summer. We had enamel wash basins in the winter. I never had food insecurity and I never felt poor. But of course, by the time I'd hit about middle school, my mom had her law degree and built a nice house. I went to college out east and my plan then was to get out of town and never come back. As soon as I left, I was like, I want to come home and never leave. And I probably freaked my parents out. This is Archie Mosai, who I mentioned to you earlier. When I finished college, I said, I'm not taking a job and I'm not going to go to grad school either. I'm going to come home and walk the earth. I'm going to hang out with my elders. I want to spend time at ceremony. I want to learn about our ways. And they said, that's beautiful, but you figure out how to pay for it because we're done now. So I did. This is pre-cell phones. So I hopped in a car, drove over to Balsam Lake. Archie Mosai is from a different community from me, not terribly far away, but far enough. And I remember coming in the door to his house, and that's when he was watching his WWF SmackDown on the TV. And I was expecting him to be like smoking a pipe, praying for world peace or something. But he turned off the TV and he stopped and looked at me and he said, oh, I've been waiting for you. And I remember thinking, how could you be waiting for me? You don't even know who I am. But he had had a dream about somebody, and I looked like the person in his dream. And after that, he just kind of opened the door to me. I ended up sleeping on his couch, driving him around to funerals and ceremonies and things like that. And what I had is something that a lot of our people are denied, which is a chance to be truly immersed in our language and in our culture. He was a well-known spiritual leader. In the bottom right here, we brought him to the Conference on World Religions in Chicago. That's him with the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama wanted to meet Archie because he was the oldest spiritual leader there. And he came up with a big line of monks, and they were all bowing. And Archie had never seen anyone bow before and didn't know what that meant. So he just started patting everybody on the head saying, that's okay. That's all right. And finally, the Dalai Lama stopped the line, because in the Buddhist tradition, the head is a sacred vessel and it's taboo to touch the head. So he says, how do you greet? And he says, I don't know, shake hand. And so the Dalai Lama goes like this to shake his hand. And Archie says, no, like this. So they got the arm wrestler handshake, which I thought was a fun cultural exchange. And what I came to realize is that this is my crew, by the way. So there are 9 kids in our crew. It's a big blended family. I'm in the grandbaby business now. There's 3 of them. And I still have 3 kids at home. We got 6 out the door and 3 to go. And parenting is one of the most beautiful and terrifying jobs that there is. The number one goal has always been not to mess my kids up in a world, that has plenty of things to trip on. And I'll share just a little bit about a story with my firstborn kid, because it's part of my language journey as well as one in our community. But one of the things I realized is that there would have to be some rebuilding for me, that it wouldn't all just fall out of the sky. And I think a lot of us, we wish we had the language, either as individuals or stronger in our communities. But all the wishing in the world doesn't make it well. We actually have to do the things. And I think a lot of times we feel like, and I know that I felt in my life, oh, my dad's a white man, I'm less than. I didn't grow up with my language, I'm less than. And thinking that the language and the culture live some special magical place that if I could only get there, I'd find it, as opposed to looking inside for our blood memory and looking in our own communities and homes for all of the many things that often are shared with us, picking them up, amplifying them, and going after the other pieces to rebuild. So connection and culture live inside of us, and having a rich cultural life is not just about looking out and looking for, it's about looking within. We can do that wherever we live, and the awakening is healing and empowering. So these are some pictures of my firstborn daughter through different phases of her life. And when she was coming into the world, I was so set on trying to do everything right. I was talking to Archie. Here he is. These are some of her namesakes at her naming ceremony. And I was asking questions. What do we do when a baby's born? What do I need to do with the placenta, the afterbirth? And so I was asking all these kinds of questions about cultural things, but also language things. And I vowed that I would only speak Ojibwe to her, and committed myself to doing that during her younger years. And I remember, she was probably about 2, waking up in the middle of the night crying, and she's crying. And I just remember thinking, it's working. Yes. And I brought her with me when we went out to Sault Ste. Marie for one of the very first Anishinaabe language conferences. And they asked me to give a speech. So I was up there at the podium, and she was probably about 3 or 4 then, literally running in circles around the podium while I'm talking. And finally, her voice picked up on the microphone as she's running by saying, "Hingi boogit," meaning I farted. And that was it. like no one could hear a single word I had to share after that. My talk was over. They were all laughing and rolling and having a great time. But they were also saying things like, oh my God, did you hear that little kid? That little kid, she was speaking Ojibwe. Something's happening. And I've just been really heartened by her experience. You know, I made sure she got to go harvest wild rice. Here she is making maple sugar cakes, things like that. Today, she's part of a team that we have been working in Mille Lacs especially, but other communities too, recording and transcribing stories from our elders. And so she's, you know, a published author doing work with Ojibwe language. And what we've done is we have restored the intergenerational transmission of the language in our family. That's something that is not super common, but we would like to make it so. Now, I have a huge family and I've been trying to get this going with all the other kids, but frankly, with a huge blended family and English being used in so many other places, there are plenty of barriers. And my other children are in various stages of knowledge about their language, but probably none stronger than my firstborn child. And so it's almost like my efficacy was declining as the crew got bigger. And so we've had our own challenges with keeping this going in our own crew, but it's an ongoing effort. And one success story doesn't make a language live. You actually need scale. And, you know, a language lives when it lives in the hearts and minds of young people. By the way, a lot of people don't realize this, but one of the best predictors of the language that a child will know is not the language of their parents, nor is it the language of their teacher. It is the language of their peers. And this is what happens when someone is an immigrant, you know, from a one language community to a country where there is a different official language. And what happens is they'll use their heritage language at home and they'll use the language of the new country when they're out and about. The kids will use that when they go to school. And then when those kids grow up and get married and have babies, then they're using the language of the new country rather than the heritage language. And it's only 2 generations. Most immigrants lose the heritage language. So one of the successes for the immersion model with Indigenous language education is that it switches the peer language to the target language, in our case, Ojibwe. All right, so I'll share a little bit about the Language Warriors Manifesto, and I won't go through everything. You're not going to unpack a whole book in one talk, but I speak a little bit to the importance of language. And I think we've heard some things, you know, in the introductory remarks that speak to that. I'll just add a couple of things. The obstacles, some of which are well known, but some other ones maybe we don't think about quite as much. I share a little bit, like I did just now, about my own language journey, but there's also a story about a collective one. How do you go about building an immersion school program? How do you scale that up across space? How do you develop resources? Things like that. So I'll share a few things about that too. One thing to say is that language revitalization is hard work and it is courageous work. And all that's necessary for a language to die is for us to do nothing or too little. At the same time, I feel like the future vitality of a language like Ojibwe, it might not seem certain, but it is certainly possible. And it really depends on what we do about it right now. We're seeing, by the way, these are macro linguistic trends. And, you know, Lakehead, you are positioned in a good spot right now because in addition to your own history from starting in Indigenous instructors program back in 1973, Canada is finally paying some attention to this coming out of the Truth and Reconciliation effort, and will be allocating more resources in the years to come as a restorative justice measure. In addition to that, the United Nations is declaring this as a decade of Indigenous languages, and they will be allocating more tools, resources, and attention to this topic. And so it's a good time to lean in on language revitalization. We're at a time now, there's 6,700 languages spoken in the world. 2,500 are extremely endangered, like spoken by less than 20 people. That's a lot of languages spoken by very few people. In the United States and Canada, there may be 130 languages out of hundreds that were spoken pre-contact. And, only about 20 of those are spoken by kids. 4 of them have so many speakers, they'll definitely be here 100 years from now. And actually, because of the strength of speakers, for example, in the Severn region, Oji Cree and so forth, some Ojibwe dialects are included in that, but not all, and not in all places. So that's the macro trend. It's pretty sobering. Even in Eastern Ontario, like some places like Wikwemikong have a pretty decent strength of speakers, over 20% of the homes repeat using the language as every day, for the language in the home every day. The fluency rate's actually higher than this there. But even there, that's not 100%, and you are seeing decline. So the best way to learn a language is to learn it as your first language in the home. But if we wait for everything to start in the home, you'll be waiting until it's gone. Most of our speakers are past the age of having and raising children, although there are some grandparents raising kids, and sometimes with great effect on their language journey. That doesn't get you the scale. We need to do some other things too. There's external resistance. So, there are only about 100 languages in the world that are widely taught at colleges and universities. We're seeing the proliferation of really just a handful of major world languages like, English, Mandarin, Spanish, and so forth. And we're even seeing like in Canada, you get official language laws around English and French. In the US, it's around English. And there's conversation about expanding our definitions to include Indigenous languages, at least as an official acknowledgement of heritage languages. That's an emerging thought and effort, but still those things have big effects because you get all of the governmental support for the official languages and very little for other ones. We got issues with funding, the need for resources. Like if you want to learn English and you send your kid to school, it's pretty amazing, but in kindergarten, they're learning letters, right? In first grade, they're learning sight words and then sometimes those second graders, they're even getting into chapter books. I had a second grader reading Harry Potter, So the explosion into literacy happens very fast. If you're learning English and you send your kid to school, there are 5,000 books loaded into an accelerated reader program in every classroom. The kid can pick any book off the shelf and can even go to the computer kiosk, take a test that will examine their language comprehension and literacy building blocks. We don't even have the 5,000 books, much less the accelerated reader program. If you want literacy through an Indigenous language, you need all that stuff. So resources. All right. And there's also resistance at an internal level. Indigenous people, like we do this thing where we code switch, and I do it all the time too. So like I would say, I'm good at whiteness, right? Like my academic English is on, I got credentials, we could speak to my credentials in an Indigenous context, but it's a whole different conversation than even what goes into the bio that people read when you give a talk, and those are very different credentials. Those would be more the stuff I was talking about. Who's your family, where you're from, where have you spent your time? What do you know about our language? What's your clan? Those kind of things. Those are like more Indigenous credentials, but often they're not valued the same way. Also, because of that, a lot of our people adopt this view like we're living in two worlds and you got to be good at the white world because that gets you money and success. To the point where some of our own people start abandoning the Indigenous stuff. And even those who will say they embrace it often spend a lot of time embracing everything else. And by the way, nobody's off the hook. That includes me. So we have to look introspectively and challenge ourselves to center what we truly value. I see, for example, and this would be the case in both Canada and the United States, a lot of our leaders are saying, how can we climb the mountain of economic prosperity and sovereignty? And these are good efforts to undertake. But I got some friends down at Seminole Nation in Florida, which are one of the tribes in the US that have completely eliminated poverty for their tribal citizenry. They own the Hard Rock Cafe enterprise. They operate many international businesses, you know, and they're extremely financially successful. But if you say, well, what keeps you up at night? They will always say the same thing. It is language and culture loss. And I'm concerned that we will be, you know, many of our people with great integrity climbing the mountain of sovereignty and economic prosperity, get to the top, look around and say, oh my God, we just climbed the wrong mountain. We should have been climbing the mountain of language and culture revitalization while we had the people and the resources and the opportunity. And that doesn't mean the other stuff's not important. A lot of our people still have boil water advisories, are at Maslow's hierarchy of needs tier 1. They're worried about food, clothing, and shelter. Of course, we need to tend to those things. And if that's what you're worried about because you're dealing with extreme poverty, well, working on language revitalization feels like a luxury. So we have these internal things that we have to deal with. And also, and there's more to say about it, but we deal with internalized, lateral, and intra-oppressed group oppressions. And I could refer you, for example, to the Paulo Freire book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It's a great one. But among the things in there, he'll say there's 4 pillars that hold up an oppression. And only one of the 4 pillars is an external agent trying to keep people down. So for example, in a historical context, for the sake of irony, we could look at the Pilgrims, right? They're being persecuted for their religious beliefs back in England. They literally get into boats. They go all the way across the ocean. So they totally got away from the people who were oppressing them. Was that the end of oppression? Hardly. Where was it? And the answer is they carried it on the inside of themselves. So it showed up in their community with blame and shame stuff in the Puritan culture. That was internalized oppression. It showed up as they were mean to their own people, Salem witch trials. It showed up when they were mean to other people, beating up on natives, beating up on Black people. And as Indigenous people, we inherited plenty of oppressions. So it shows up the same way. Internalized oppression is, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I'm not good at languages, I'll never get this. It's also a higher suicide rate and substance abuse rate. That's internalized oppression. Lateral oppression, that's the crabs in the bucket. Who the heck does that guy think he is? Probably got a beaded pen in his beaded briefcase, thinks he's better than everybody. Who does he think he is using our language? Is he trying to shame me? Trying to out-Indian everybody? Come on, I'm going somewhere else. It's intra-oppressed group oppression. So it could be anti-Black or homophobic ideas and thoughts that pop up in Indigenous spaces. And by the way, all of those things, internalized, lateral, intra-oppressed group oppression, they all preserve white supremacy and English language dominance. Only one of those pillars is the man keeping us down. Oppressive government policies and things like that, residential boarding schools. That's a significant pillar, but it's only 1 out of 4. It's both sobering and empowering to know that 3 out of the 4 pillars that hold up oppression are happening in our own communities. Empowering because we can actually do something about those 3. We can fight this fight too. The Canadian government should treat us better and so forth. But we can do more about these. How do I talk about myself to myself? How do I talk about my fellow natives? When am I teasing someone in a good-spirited way, and when am I hurting them or putting them in their place? When am I holding up an oppression dynamic as I give voice to something that hurts other people? We can all check those things. And all of those things elevate our condition, help us mobilize resources, work together, and fight the oppressions everywhere. So another important message is we cannot expect our people to meet us where we want them to be. We have to meet them where they're at. Meaning, a lot of our people are dealing with food, clothing, shelter, boil water advisories, trying to figure out how to make it work in this crazy, complicated world. And we have to be both, empathic, understanding, and working to alleviate suffering and meet their needs at the same time that we are pulling everybody into the conversations about the big picture things that will keep us identifiable to ourselves, to our ancestors, to the Manitug, and all those things. Yeah, this is what I was just mentioning with the 4 pillars in Paulo Freire's book. By the way, I'll share a copy of the PowerPoint, so if anyone wants the references to books and things, make sure you get it. And they are recording the session, and that'll be shared and posted for other people too. Also important that we don't just get lost in competing victimization in the oppression Olympics, saying we suffered more than this group of people or that group of people, or one tribe versus another and things like that. We are all brothers and sisters in the same effort to be more fully humanized. And instead of fighting over, who gets to be the oppressor and who has to be the oppressed, we should all work together from all groups and just fight oppression. I'm going to share just a couple of quick stories about some things that have given me a lot of hope. 30 years ago, the Hawaiian language was illegal for use in public schools. Today, it's one of the official languages for the state of Hawaii. When it was illegal 30 years ago, they were down to 1,000 speakers left on planet Earth. Half lived in one isolated island community, and the other half were all elders aged 70 and older. Today, there are 23,000 speakers of Hawaiian. There are 22 Hawaiian medium schools where you can go to school from early childhood all the way up through the completion of high school, and all of the instruction will be delivered in Hawaiian. You can actually go to college and receive all of the classes for your college degree all in Hawaiian. It is the medium of instruction. And they tripled, of those 23,000 speakers, a little over 3,000 have learned it as their first language in the home. So they tripled the population of fluent first speakers, and they multiplied 23-fold the entire population of speakers. Now, of course, we all want to do this. It was not like a magic silver bullet type solution. It was just a lot of hard work, and it's still a lot of hard work. If you want, I can kind of break down a little more about what they do, but I'll just share a little bit that they have a very culture-based approach. Like we might talk to 7 grandfather teachings. They've actually identified 12 Hawaiian values. Aloha, which means hello, goodbye, and I love you. And it's also ohana, which means family. So they have a very intentional way that they go about this, and they're very strategic about all of their efforts. So one of the things they'll do is at the start of school every day, the entire staff's waiting outside the school. And then the kids get dropped off, buses, straggling parents. The kids line up and they do what these kids are doing. They sing in the Polynesian tradition, asking for permission to come into school. When the staff feels they're sincere, they sing back. And then every kid gets a hug from every single person who works there every single day. Aloha. Now in the mainstream, we would probably be thinking, are you serious? 45 minutes on cultural enrichment every day. Our kids are awake in the morning. Make them do math. Until you realize that Navahi, where this picture was taken, has a 100% graduation rate, and they do not have a statistically significant truancy problem. If somebody's figuring that sort of stuff out, maybe we should pay more attention to that. They also have some other remarkable things that they do. They say when we matriculate a kid, we don't matriculate a kid, we matriculate a whole family. And they have an exchange of promises, like the families go out and pick medicines, they weave a giant lei that goes over the door to the school. And then the parents have to say, we are bringing to you our most sacred human, our daughter, and we are entrusting her to your care. And we are asking you to accept her into your ohana, to love her as your own family, to take care of her as you would your own. And the school has to answer back, we are humbled and honored that you have thought us worthy to receive your most sacred human. We will accept her into our ohana. We will love her as our own. And these things are very powerful, and they get in front of the idea that schools are about assimilation or oppression. And they get in front of the idea that schools should be places where parents warehouse their kids so they can go to work. And it really gets people on the same page. There are many other impressive things to how they go about their business, but the Hawaiian experiment is certainly worth a look. And there are lots of free YouTube videos and other things about what they do. This is Rose Tainter. She is one of our elders saying we want an Ojibwe immersion school like those Hawaiians got. And this was 23 years ago. And I got one. I'm on the school board for Wadukodading Ojibwe Immersion Charter School, which is actually in the Hayward Lakes area in Wisconsin. And it's a remarkable effort. There are a lot of things that they do there. They have an integrated curricular approach. It's a full immersion school. I was doing some assessments there for their 4-year-old program some years ago, and I was just amazed. There was, 4-year-old kids are pretty little. And there was circle time, and a little 4-year-old kid gets up and says, Buju abenuji do, gani neji we bakagujing nongam. So the kid's saying, hey kids, what's going on with the weather today? Had a little felt board behind him. One of the kids says, Aniza gate hekadebwe. He puts a picture up with the sun peeking out from behind the clouds. Awegonengeabi nodenena hat mushkawani mud. Puts another one up for a strong wind. And I was watching these kids run circle time. And I was thinking, man, I can't even get my kids to sit still for supper. So the classroom discipline and the poise of a 4-year-old kid to, get up and speak. And they were speaking a language that their parents do not speak at home. They didn't have 20 years in a program. They had some months in the program. That immersion model works with developing the language skills and with so many other things too. Role models make a difference. I think to my mother, seeing one professional Native ever, and that was a school nurse, and she thought maybe I can be a nurse. If you have an immersion model, you pretty much have to have Indigenous teachers in front of the kids to deliver the language. Kids start believing in themselves in a whole different way. And I could give you an example of how the integrated curriculum works, and they actually integrate some activities across grades. They might take the whole school and go harvest wild rice. And they might say, Anish minik manomen ge tuyungo maji maning. Like, how much rice can we fit in a canoe? The kids are like, okay, rectangle, triangle, another triangle. All right, fill the canoe full of water, pour it in these big cylinders, double check your measurements. Hey, we got that right. There's a tobacco offering. The little kids need to know the life cycle of a plant, so they study that. The older kids might measure water tension levels or something. They harvest the wild rice, they bring it back to the school. Their music program might be hand drum songs as they parch and then jig the rice. And then they winnow, and then there's a feast, and they bring some home. They might do extension activities and say, hey, what's the caloric content for one serving of rice? What's its nutritional value? If you had, this is a staple food and you had 720 people in this village, 543 in this one, and so forth, how much collectively would they need to harvest to get them through a year? Now, some years the yield will be higher, some years it'll be lower. So they do some graphing exercises. How much would you need to harvest every year to sustain this population? And the kids are doing their math and they're like, wow, our ancestors did that. And the teacher's like, nope, you just did that. So you get this empowerment Obviously, they're learning their science, their math, all these other curricular pieces, but they're doing it in an Indigenous context with academic rigor. So that sort of stuff is pretty impressive. We've been working on bilingual signage. We've got it on the hospital, regional event center, all the public schools. Got it on the cop cars. Check this out. Ganawanjigang Minawa Nadamagang, to protect and serve. What do you think it would do to community policing if Thunder Bay Police did this after all the reports we've had about racial issues in policing in Thunder Bay? Could be really positive. Yep, by the way, does not get rid of all of our problems. You want a little more background on some of the immersion schools? This is a free video, First Speakers Restoring the Ojibwe Language. There's a website for it. You could also just do a search on YouTube and it'll pop up right away, or Vimeo. We've been doing some recent work with the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. They did a language census there and identified only 25 fluent speakers left when we started this. I came to a crazy meeting. They said, we have some overages from grants. We want to do something with language. What should we do? I said, well, how much is your overage? I said, well, it was like $14 million. I almost spit my teeth out. I said, listen, your elders are too small in number to do all of the teaching. We need to do some things that are going to set them up so they can teach people for hundreds of years to come. And we did. We started to develop kids' books. We developed Rosetta Stone, and we set up this contract in some really interesting ways. But we released year 1 of Rosetta Stone, which will push to an app on your computer or your smartphone. It's got audio, video, all kinds of other things. And with this contract, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe owns all of the intellectual property rights, the cultural property rights, and collects 100% of the revenue. They just paid the Rosetta Stone Corporation for their services in helping develop the technological support for the work. The app can actually correct your pronunciation as you interact with it in real time. And this year we released year 1 of Rosetta Stone. Next year we release year 2. And then 1 year every year for the next 6 years until we have a full 6-year development of Rosetta Stone. It'll be the largest Rosetta Stone development for any Indigenous language. And what's also cool is that the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe says, we realize there are many dialects of Ojibwe. We have no interest in imposing ours on anyone else. Anyone who wants this can get it, but we will show the building blocks and tools to any other tribe or language community for Ojibwe that wants to work with it. And although they need to cut fresh video and audio so it's correct for those dialects, some of the curricular building blocks, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's pretty exciting. It's free for their band members, and there's a nominal charge of $25 for other Indigenous people, $100 for institutions and non-Indigenous people. It's pretty cheap. But even with that, the projected revenues will probably recapture everything they put into their contract. And in the long run, this will have cost them nothing. By the way, as we are working on these things, the pandemic was really tough. We lost 20% of our fluent speakers. That is no joke, including some of the people in this picture here. This guy on the end, Joe Nekwanabe, his brother and his sister passed away during the pandemic. When we had our book launch event for the new books, we actually came up with 5 new books. I thought he'd be saying about how this is the hardest time of his life. And he got up there and he said, we've been through a lot the past couple of years. But also over the past couple of years, working on Rosetta Stone and all these new books, I've been so heartened to see young people leaning into our language. I'm so encouraged to see our tribe supporting it. And I am elated to see the work that we have accomplished. And I think working on these books was the best time of my life. Man, I was like choking back to tears. I couldn't even believe it. So one of the messages is doing language revitalization work. It is healing. It is healing for young people who are trying to overcome intergenerational disconnection from language, culture, and historical trauma, but it is healing for our elders to know that they're not all going to take it with them, and that it will live beyond them, and that their legacy is in the hearts and minds of our younger generations. I like the Carl Jung quote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed." And certainly that's been my experience with language work. I'll leave you with this thought here. This is a view kind of off the front deck of my house, summer view. And when my folks got started, they acquired a pretty small piece of property, a pretty good sized piece of property for a small amount of money. And it did not look like this. It actually looked like this, wide open farm fields. That's my dad on the tractor with my brother. And what they did is they started planting trees, and it completely transformed the landscape. They planted all of the trees in this picture here, transformed the landscape, the ecosystem. And it's just a handful of people, granted with a child labor force. That's me. And what a change. And I think when we look around now and think about climate change, race relations, the damage done to our languages and cultures, a lot of us think, man, there's not a lot I can do about that. What should I do? And a lot of us think, I'll just be a decent human, tell my kids to be decent humans, hope it's enough, but it's never quite enough. All that's necessary for evil to triumph is good people to do nothing or too little. But it's not like we need to take this mountain of problems humans have been making for thousands of years and move that mountain right now. It's more like we need to keep planting the seeds, and it can transform the entire landscape and the ecosystem. And that's our work in language revitalization. And it can transform everything. It's important and heroic work. This is Anna Gibbs, one of my mentors, holding my last born child. This picture is about 10 years old now. And I learned a lot from her about how to restore our language and culture through generations. Here's my kid, who we were really worried about when she was born, but following Anna's directions, and one of them included, she was saying, when that baby's born, you take her placenta, you put it out in the woods, you bury it by a tree. The maple tree is a tree of life. Some people actually use a white pine tree because it's for longevity. So we did these things. This kid turned out healthy, vibrant, dauntless. You get a sense of her. And so now in the spring, and this is what it looks like now because we're having a snowstorm like everybody else out here. But, we go out in the woods, we tap these maple trees, and the placentas for my kids are buried all over in the woods by these trees. They're putting tobacco offerings there. They're taking life from the tree of life. And it's restoring this intergenerational transmission of our language and our culture. That doesn't mean it's a slam dunk or an easy thing, but I have hope for all of our efforts. And to see institutions like Lakehead really leaning into this, I really feel heartened about where that can take us. I'm going to drop the PowerPoint now. Not sure exactly how I'm doing on time, so you can tell me if we have time to take a few questions. I'd be happy to do that.
We have about 5 minutes.
Okay, so we have time to get a couple of questions, which I'd be happy to do. And I'm just catching up in the chat too with some great comments. So I really appreciate it. I will drop in the chat today a link if you want to get Rosetta Stone, so that you got the connection there. I see that one. I see there's some other questions about language resources. Good ones. Yeah, Miigwech, thanks for the kind comments, everybody. So feel free to drop into the chat or the Q&A any questions that you have.
So Dr. Treuer, we had one comment early on, so I will, oh shoot. Sorry, all of a sudden I'm now on the screen and I lost my chat. 1 second here.
Yeah.
It was around the importance of one's reconnection to their language and culture. What are your thoughts on this? Do you feel that culture is a vital component in sustaining recovery in regards to substance use disorders?
Yes, I do. I really feel like the opposite of addiction is not simply sobriety, it's connection. And we've kind of done a disservice to those who've been navigating substance abuse by saying, this is your individual problem with your individual relationship with this chemical substance, and it'll be handled through your individual counseling. And the really successful efforts, the most successful efforts, are ones that give someone something to connect to in place of that unhealthy connection. And that can be connecting to healthy affinity groups, community, ceremony, and language. And those things genuinely resonate because we're not trying to be someone we're not, and make all the difference in the world. And there are many people who have navigated addiction successfully by reconnecting with those things that have great meaning. And so the stronger they are, they can supplant those unhealthy things. In many ways, one of the reasons why people from highly marginalized groups have higher rates of substance abuse is because we have an intrinsic human need for connection. It's only been like up until about 10,000 years ago, all humans, all groups, we survived not because we were better at something than the person next to us, but because the person next to us loved us. And they protected us from the saber-toothed tiger or the cave bear or whatever. And we are hardwired to need connection and belonging. And it is our increased focus on competition, individualism, and materialism that have led us all to be so disconnected from those things. So regrowing it can be truly empowering for everybody.
Now we have a bunch of questions and not a lot of time. So I'm going to just sort of lump some of them together, just in terms of the spirit of the question. Just one question around the connection between land-based language and learning might be connected with what approach should be taken to curriculum development, oral communication, reading, writing. Maybe if you could speak to that for a moment.
Yes. So, curriculum development has many different dimensions, but it's an important part of the work. So I believe we need to indigenize these things. And that means having Indigenous people centered in the development of the curriculum. And that also means truly indigenizing it so that you can put a brown face on assimilation and still get assimilation. So we have to approach this with an Indigenous context and lens. What are the values that we want to center? What are the teachings that we want people to know? How do we want people to go about learning? And, this is a big discussion. It's probably a separate talk all by itself, but it is certainly worth having vibrant and developmental conversations. And I think, frankly, we're even finding that our modern educational wheelhouse is not working even for all the white kids, that people learn in many different ways. And we need to have a diverse set of tools that speak to the ways, as well as a diverse curriculum that empowers everybody to learn about themselves as well as the rest of the world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll just sneak one more in there. As a mixed Indigenous person who is learning their language, how do you combat lateral violence when you don't feel Native enough? Or are you out of your element because you're living in two worlds?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, you are not alone. This is, our population is extremely complex. We are multiracial. Some people look brown, some people look black, some people look white, some people look racially ambiguous. And when you get crap, pushback, marginalization from within, usually that is a reflection of someone else's low self-esteem and issues, much more than it is anything about you, certainly not any deficiency in you. This is your cultural patrimony. This is your language. You have a right to learn it, know it, and live it. So you just keep leaning in and you will find healing from that. That doesn't mean there won't be setbacks and barriers, but you just push right through.
Miigwech. Well, you've given us quite a lot to lean into to use your words, really exciting, pieces of this, and also some connection to other ways that we can connect with you, if not in person today. But I would like to, before we get to our final wrap up and our kind of thank you at the end, I would like to invite Vicki Meneg, who is going to be sharing some highlights with us. Vicki is a graduate student with Lakehead University, working with Dr. Paul Cormier, and a founding member of the United Nations Decade of Indigenous Languages Working Group. And she's going to take a couple of minutes and just share Lakehead University's Indigenous language initiatives. Vicki?
Thank you for that warm welcome, Denise. Waywana Bojo and Didoe Maganadak, Mijakto Quegani and Indigenous Cause, Dai, Mayingan and Dodem, Kitchenamamassing and Donjaba, Misa go Pane de Bendagozian, Nasoish Gading, Medewi Goning, Niswindan, we Naso Medewian, Nui Jagnashim. So I just want to say thank you to our wonderful speakers, to Dr. Treuer, who is, I actually remember listening to Dr. Treuer when I was at Oshkinikwe at Anishinaabe Moenteg. And at that time, I was so distracted by that fast life stage that I didn't hear everything that he said, except for the fact that I saw so much hope in somebody being so young that was speaking Anishinaabe. And since that time, Dr. Treuer has influenced my learning journey in probably more ways that he knows. So I'm so grateful that he was able to come and help us today with launching this strategy, as well as to all of the speakers and the people who are part of the working group. Not all of them could make it today because they're in other meetings, but I just want to think about them as we move forward, because how we developed the United Nations Indigenous Languages Initiative at Lakehead University took everybody's input, and everyone contributed from their own hearts, their own minds, from their experiences with their families, their loved ones, their communities. So this really is a culmination of that work. So I just want to share my screen here quickly. I have a little presentation and it won't take too long, but can everybody see that? Can somebody let me know if you can see that? Yeah, okay.
Yes, we can.
So, our initiative started in response to the Los Pinos Declaration in Mexico.
Vicki, sorry to interrupt, but we've just lost your audio. You're far away and mumbled.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So the purpose of our initiative is to create a 10-year initiative in response to the crisis of Indigenous language laws and in support of the UNESCO Los Pinos Declaration on the Decade of Indigenous Languages. Our vision, and this is really inspired by a lot of different elders that are working within our campuses, but our community work that we continue to do at Lakehead University, and then also within our programs, our departments, and within Indigenous initiatives as well, is this idea and this vision of creating fully fluent Anishinaabe communities, and how can our institutions support the development of fully fluent Anishinaabe speaking communities. And that the vision is that wherever we walk on our territories as Anishinaabe people, we will see our life reflected back to us in everything and everywhere that we go, and in everything that we do. Our languages, our nature, our way of being as Anishinaabe people, that will be everywhere. And so how can we as an institution support that development? The 10-year Indigenous Languages Initiatives will seek to increase Indigenous language fluency levels in and around our campuses and partner communities. Within 10 years, LU will expand structural supports for authentic linguistic reproduction. Our guiding principles. So we look at Indigenous languages as a social justice movement that is going to take everybody, whether you're a learner of Anishinaabe or Cree or Michif, but it is a social justice movement that has a place and a role for everybody. My elder, Badweden Benesiaban, he used to always say to me, leave no one behind, and ensure that everybody has a place in this movement. And so that was really the motivating and driving factor of creating this initiative. So we operate on 3 principles. Number 1 is reconciliation, which you heard our president speak about this morning, about the responding to the calls to action. Diversity, equity, inclusion. This is about this deep appreciation of Indigenous identity and languages, and the continued indigenization processes where we're working towards that reflective mirror, that life is going to reflect our identity as Anishinaabe people. So how do we plan to meet this? So there's 5 pillars that we're looking towards meeting these goals. And one is academic opportunities. And this really acknowledges the work that we have done and the work that we want to continue to expand upon in creating programs. And you heard our Vice Provost Denise Baxter speak this morning about the fact that we offer both formal and informal programs. And we want to continue to expand upon that in collaboration with communities. Research and innovation. This is really looking at the different ways where we can protect and preserve Anishinaabe and other Indigenous languages in and around our campuses. Dialect mapping, preservation of language samples, community engagement. This is really focusing on the partnerships that we already have with First Nations communities, but also creating more partnerships with First Nations communities. One of the important things about community engagement is that we don't, as Lakehead University, we don't tell communities what to do, but we support them in the vision that they have for their communities. Environment is talking about the indigenization of our 2 campuses at Aurelia and Thunder Bay, which has already occurred. And we have several spaces that are dedicated to Anishinaabe peoples. But what we want to do there is continue to create immersion spaces where Indigenous languages can be spoken, and different things like signage, and ensuring that our languages are included everywhere on campuses. And international solidarity networks for language revitalization. And you heard Dr. Treuer talk earlier about the Maori and how revolutionary their movement was to revitalize their languages, now being one of the official languages of the state of Hawaii. And that is so incredibly beautiful. We're talking about creating partnerships with other countries and other Indigenous peoples across the world who are working towards language revitalization. So what have we done so far? We have continued building on existing internal and external support networks for Indigenous languages. We've established the United Nations DIL working group, which many of us who presented today are a part of, but as well, many of us are not here today. But it includes elders, first language speakers. Elder Jean is one of those people that sit on that. Hector Kupagog is also one of the people who sit on that committee. And then we also have a lot of the provost and other administrative support and faculty members that are part of that working group. We've established the conference subcommittee, so we will be hosting a conference probably closer to the end of this year, where we will talk about language revitalization, and we are looking forward to bringing in international partners to share their experience of language revitalization. And we've established our 10-year draft work plan. So what can you do for Indigenous languages, and how can you support Lakehead's work, and how can we support your work in this idea of Indigenous reciprocity? So the first thing that you can do is learn an Indigenous language. Do whatever you can, but don't Guamzin. Be determined in your language learning journey. And for me, myself, language learning is the organizing principle of my life. It's what I wake up for in the morning, and it's what I go to bed doing. So it is really, and it's the most amazing journey that you could ever take. And actually, Dr. Treuer talks about that within his book, The Language Warriors Manifesto, about this actually being a labor of love. And it is truly a labor of love. And it's so, it really, I think I'm just kind of going off topic here, but learning Anishinaabe for me is reconnecting me with my heart, and to live through my heart, and to only speak Misako Pane Debwayan Jinita Ojibwe Moyan. Sorry, but that's how much you learn to love the language when you start learning Anishinaabe. You can follow, I wouldn't be from Lakehead if I didn't say this, but follow us on social media and follow our Indigenous initiatives pages and our Aboriginal education pages, and keep it up to date with the events that we're going to have forthcoming in support of this strategy. Get involved with your speaker community. And obviously there's considerations there because of COVID, but you want to be able to get involved with your local area speaker community, because there's a lot of different programs that are happening right across Anishinaabe-Alpine right now. And if you wish to get involved with the UNDIL working group, you can contact me. I'll put my email in the chat. But the way that we wrote the terms of reference for this working group is to allow people to come to any of these meetings and be able to voice whatever they would like to share. And we want to really ensure that that opportunity is extended to the members of our First Nations communities that surround our two campuses. So with that, I just want to say miigwech and thank you everybody for showing up, and it's been a beautiful morning.
Miigwech, Vicky. So as I guess as the way of as it goes, we often have gifting as part of our ceremonial space. So we have the opportunity today to have David Anderson from Good Minds Books, which is down, I believe he's in Six Nations. And so we are going to be sending a little bundle of books to these 5 people whose names we've drawn. So Anna Chief will be in contact with you to get your mailing address, and we'll have those shipped directly from Good Minds Books for you. So the names that were drawn today were Anangig Hardy, Lily McGuire, Riva Bomberry, Shannon Ogawissa, and Catherine Free. So just keep an eye out for an email from Anna Chief at Lakehead University. And we will be working with Good Minds to get your books to you. One of the books in your little bundle will be the Warriors Manifesto. And to Dr. Anton Treuer, it was a privilege to have some time to be with you today. Just a few things that really resonated with me was really thinking about that opportunity to for education in school and the place where I work, that schools are a place for people to come to learn about themselves and the rest of the world, and not being assimilated or learn to behave in a certain fashion. And that is really something I think that resonates with me as an educator, and something that I hold dear. Also listening and speaking with elders. I meet with a group of elders on Zoom every Thursday evening, and a group of elders from my territory up north, Treaty 9 on the Albany River. And there's about 15 elders who come together on Zoom every second Thursday evening. And for 90 minutes, they speak with each other in a particular, whatever area they decide they want to talk about that night. But it is such a privilege just to sit and listen in that space, because in this time of mobility and the pandemic, people aren't always coming together in the same way. So encouraging us to find those spaces, create those spaces to work with our language speakers that are with us, I think is really an important space. And David Anderson of Good Minds did let us know that the books that you referenced, the children's books, he does carry. And so anyone who's interested in reaching out to those certainly can do that. And then finally, climbing the right mountain. I actually had been to the Hard Rock Cafe in Florida years ago, and I didn't really realize that they were now the owners of the whole franchise. But I think of the work that we're doing here, the work that you're doing, and really thinking about what matters. And I think we're all very mindful of the time-sensitive nature of our elders and our language speakers with us, and making sure that we're spending time with them, and we're learning in the way that we can, and thinking very strategically about what that means to move forward. And so I just want to thank you so much again for speaking with us today. And I would like to invite Elder Jean Nawagizik, who will share our closing with us. Elder Jean.
Jimmy Rich, Paul, Anton, for your sharing. Very honored to be able to sit here and listen. Jimmy Rich, Kino dog, Chinabe Mak, the Nishnabe Mot, the Nikes go, Nishnabe Mwin, you know. Chigegun and me Bomad zone and the non go esket and mad zoin Kenaman when in Ia or Yen Nishnave or net up Mosai in the more king. The Nas Dom, the one Kenny one way in the K Kajaka win no whether you were cooking and the cake and it's the mad zine. Anish, when Kigagi Din, Ka Zapta go see when they go Gidim, Inishnabe in Noch, Chekenda sauce where Nashi Mot Nishnabeka, Ken Mot, Ken Mokazot, Kenigagon, Potash, the Ken among where Gamin goes in the Gibat and Ma song, which of Mad Sanan, that the Besen Ma song, where Nishinabe of Moset, Kinawe, Nishinabe, me and Mashomiska, Kanaj Mutuit, where Nishinabe, Mano Nishinabe, Kinawe, Mino Nishinabe, Kai, Gawe, Pkan, Dajak now Masinan, Ibamad Zet, Wabamad, in Kichigagon. Near K walk down where Gigagi Dian Oncom, Genin Gachin the Keenan, or K, where watch the one where Nishnabe win, and the Garcin meaning any wind. Anishmia, no Keno, and a K, and a mock, no cut among where Nishnabe win. Near when then I got set the more, and set the more when Nishnabe Gigagi that to me. Thank you, everyone. Just for anybody that's traveling, make sure you travel home safe. And I'll close with a short prayer. And I wish everybody for the best in language. The language of the heart is our way of life. So if we lose our language, we lose our heart. And we lose our way of life. That's the way I interpret your talk today, that we don't forget that, you know, and I believe that too. Ishnabe Win is the language of the heart. And our way of life is the way of the heart, you know, the way of it, you know. Okay, I'm glad that I was part of this meeting this morning and safe travels. Mashomas, we got some long at kit where the me can eat connock where the object where the mix come on where me can, you know, this eagle feather we carry is from an eagle. It's an eagle feather. And when we talk about Nishnave Mikana, Migun, Mikana, you know, those words are synonymous. You know, we carry this to guide us and guide us in our language today.
Me, Gwed Elder Jean. And on behalf of us all, thank you so much for joining us today as we had our first kickoff event with Dr. Anton Treuer for the United Nations Decade of Indigenous Languages. And stay tuned because we have a lot more planned and a lot more to come over the next 10 years. And I would like to also invite you to join us on May the 5th for the final Global Indigenous Speakers Series with poet and academic Jacqueline Canagan, who is from Chile. She will be our final speaker for that series. And for our series next year, for the Global Indigenous Speaker Series, it will be focused on people throughout the world who are really focused on revitalizing and preserving and growing the Indigenous languages in their communities. So have a wonderful week. We call it Winter Wednesdays up here in the north because it never seems to look any different. But spring is just around the corner, everybody. So as Elder Jean says, safe travels and chimigoch to everybody. Have a wonderful day.